Today, you will watch a very relaxing video, so just lie on your bed and relax.
𝙤𝙘𝙝 was eagerly looking forward to the weekend. She and her husband decided to visit his mother at her dacha. They wanted to spend a few days in peace and quiet, far from the hustle and bustle of the city. Dianka is such a star. Despite her young age, she managed to endure all the rounds and won with a smile, 𝙤𝙘𝙝 recounted. She worked as a music teacher at a school, and recently, her students had participated in a competition where one girl took first place, despite fierce competition. 𝙤𝙘𝙝 loved children. She practically dissolved into them, which is why she went to work with great joy. Unfortunately, she hadn't been able to have a child of her own, but she continued to dream about it. Many of her friends had already started families, and 𝙤𝙘𝙝 could only feel envious. That's why she started meeting with them less often, as the topic of motherhood was quite painful for her. Her husband, Igor, had a much simpler attitude toward children. For him, work came first, and he dreamed of achieving great heights in his career. For now, he remained a customer service manager, but was actively aiming for the position of department head. To that end, he paved his way to the boss's office every day, building a good relationship with her. However, at some point, Igor overstepped and didn't notice how they ended up in bed together. Since then, his boss's attitude toward him changed. She started encouraging him more often, giving him bonuses, and the man was confident he was moving in the right direction. His promotion was only a matter of time. Now, though, his thoughts were entirely occupied with his mistress, for whom he wanted to buy a gift. Tanya was a wealthy woman, so to truly surprise and please her, he needed to make a real effort. Perfume or jewelry? Igor pondered, completely ignoring his wife's idle chatter. To be honest, I'm a bit jealous of them, 𝙤𝙘𝙝 continued, talking about her students. They have their whole lives ahead of them, so many opportunities. She had loved singing since childhood, and once attended a music school where all the teachers praised her and predicted a bright future. But as a teenager, 𝙤𝙘𝙝 caught a cold that caused serious complications with her ears. For a while, she couldn't hear out of one ear, so she had to abandon her musical dreams. Her parents took her to various doctors, and eventually, her hearing was restored, but precious time had been lost. 𝙤𝙘𝙝 came to terms with it and decided to become a teacher to help talented children. She wanted to continue her thought, but her husband abruptly interrupted, announcing they had arrived. Her mother-in-law was already standing on the porch, waving to them. 𝙤𝙘𝙝 had a friendly relationship with Nadezhda Petrovna. They didn't visit her often, only a couple of times a month, so they didn't have time to get on each other's nerves. Nadezhda Petrovna constantly brought up the topic of children with her daughter-in-law. She suggested all sorts of folk remedies, which 𝙤𝙘𝙝 stubbornly refused. Nevertheless, the older woman was very persistent, and even once brought a fortune-teller to her. The seer touched 𝙤𝙘𝙝's stomach and shook her head with a grim expression. This upset 𝙤𝙘𝙝 even more, though she didn't believe in people with supernatural abilities. As the fortune-teller was leaving, she quickly approached 𝙤𝙘𝙝 and whispered one phrase. "With this man, you will never have a child." Then she hurriedly left their house. 𝙤𝙘𝙝 decided not to dwell on the remark, thinking the woman was just a charlatan trying to scam more money. But the phrase lingered in her memory for a long time. Her mother-in-law greeted them with open arms. Besides the TV and gossip with neighbors, she had little entertainment, so seeing her children was like a breath of fresh air. "I have new neighbors now," Nadezhda Petrovna shared. "A young woman and a boy, about 7 years old." Igor didn't react to her words. He was engrossed in his phone, choosing a ring for his mistress. He didn't want to spend too much, but still needed to make a worthy gift. "I'll probably have to dip into the credit card," he thought to himself, pursing his lips. "Nice. People?" 𝙤𝙘𝙝 asked, trying to keep the conversation going with her mother-in-law. "No complaints so far," she chuckled. After the trip, the couple decided to rest. Igor went to the room, while 𝙤𝙘𝙝 took a walk. She felt that breathing was easier in the countryside, Trees, a river, and complete tranquility surrounded her. It would be great to have our own house, she suddenly thought. Ksenia realized she would gladly trade city life for this kind of peace. But her husband would definitely not appreciate her initiative. Igor was a city man to the core, loving the fast pace and the fight for success. The Rishatovs lived in an apartment gifted to them by Nadezhda Petrovna for their wedding. She had hoped grandchildren would soon appear, so she decided the young couple needed the 3-room apartment more than she did. She packed her things and moved to the dacha, which she loved with all her heart. Bird feeders she had made hung all over the property. She loved animals. They were a true comfort for her. The grains run out, Ksenia muttered, looking inside one. Without hesitation, she went to the shed to refill the feeders. "Can't you sit still?" Igor laughed, watching her from the balcony. Ksenia just smiled, saying, "I can't help myself." She didn't like staying idle and preferred an active lifestyle. As she approached the last feeder near the neighbor's fence, Igor had already gone back inside. Suddenly she heard voices, one clearly a woman's, the other a child's. Ksenia couldn't help but listen. "Why did we move here?" the boy asked, crossing his arms. "It was nice in the city." The young woman crouched down and put her hands on his shoulders. "I have very important business here," she said seriously. "I need to settle a score with someone who hurt me deeply." The boy's eyes widened. "Who is it?" he asked. "Our neighbor," came the reply. Glancing around, she led the boy away. For a moment, Ksenia stopped breathing. She looked around and realized that, besides her mother-in-law and this woman with the child, no one else lived nearby. Their houses stood on a small hill, just the two of them, while the rest of the village was further away. Ksenia understood. The woman was talking about them. But who in the Rishatov family could have wronged this neighbor? She had never seen the woman before. Her mother-in-law was a sweet, harmless person. Igor hadn't mentioned any past stories involving other women. But just because he didn't mention it doesn't mean nothing happened, Ksenia thought, suspecting him. She wanted to get closer to hear the rest of the conversation, but at that moment, Igor came out of the house. "Mom's getting ready to cook dinner," he announced. "Want to help her?" His voice was loud enough to carry over the fence. The neighbor immediately grabbed the boy's hand, and they disappeared into their house. Ksenia watched them with a lingering gaze. "Igor, do you know the new neighbors?" she asked, looking at him closely. "How would I?" he chuckled. "I haven't even seen these people." Ksenia nodded and went to the kitchen, but the snippet of conversation kept replaying in her mind. She tried to piece together what could have caused the neighbor's anger. "Nadezhda Petrovna, what do you think of these new neighbors?" she asked her mother-in-law while cooking. "Can you tell me anything about them?" "Nothing special," Nadezhda Petrovna shrugged. "A mother and son, polite, but they don't really talk to anyone here. I think the boy doesn't have a father. The woman's name is Natalia, and the child is Artem." Not much to go on, Ksenia thought, pursing her lips. She wanted to ask more, but her mother-in-law smoothly shifted the conversation to motherhood, bombarding her with questions. Ksenia bravely deflected, though inside, it stung. Now she started watching the neighbors more closely. Something felt off about them. The weather was warm, so Ksenia spent a lot of time on the terrace, which overlooked the neighbor's fence, giving her a perfect vantage point. But the mother and son acted completely ordinary. The woman worked in the garden. The boy played with a ball. At some point, Ksenia got tired of it all. "Can you grab my wallet?" Igor's voice came from the garage. "I want to go to the store." She nodded and went inside to get it. When she returned, she noticed Igor standing very close to the fence. Natalia quickly handed him a note. Ksenia stepped back, hiding behind the door. Her husband grabbed the note and started reading it. His face showed genuine shock. He paled, then slowly put the paper in his pocket. When he looked back, his conversation partner had already disappeared into the house. "Your wallet," 𝙤𝙤 said, approaching. Lost in thought, Igor didn't hear her steps and nearly jumped from surprise. "What?" he said, disoriented, trying to focus on her face. "You asked for your wallet," she repeated. She was intrigued by what had happened moments ago. Igor took it and walked to the gate on unsteady legs. 𝙤𝙤 watched him, burning with curiosity. She was already planning how to get hold of that note and find out what the woman wanted from her husband. For a few minutes, 𝙤𝙤 stood by the window watching her husband. Igor walked like a ghost lost in this world. When he reached the barbecue, he started frantically lighting a fire. She realized what he was about to do and rushed outside. Her nervous husband threw the note into the flames and stormed back to the house, nearly knocking 𝙤𝙤 over. She couldn't miss the chance, so despite the fire, she reached in to save the remaining piece of paper. She almost burned herself, but managed to rescue a scrap. Most of the text was destroyed, but the 2 words that survived sent chills down her spine. "Your son," written in neat handwriting. 𝙤𝙤 quickly tossed the note back into the fire and brushed off her hands. Now, not only her husband but she herself lost all peace. What did it mean? After the incident, Igor's behavior changed. Even his mother noticed. He became nervous, barely spoke, and spent all his time alone in his room. When 𝙤𝙤 entered, he would go outside. "Son, maybe you'll eat something?" Nadezhda Petrovna pleaded. "I cooked for you." That evening, Igor didn't touch the food, just sat silently, staring at one point. "I'm not hungry," he rasped, standing up from the table. "He's completely overworked," his mother sighed. "Poor thing." But 𝙤𝙤 knew it wasn't about work. It was obvious to her that Igor changed after his interaction with Natalia. What if she's blackmailing him? She suddenly thought, recalling plots from popular movies. Her vivid imagination painted the wildest scenarios. 𝙤𝙤 shook her head, trying to dismiss such thoughts. The day of their departure approached. Igor was more eager than anyone to leave. He even suggested leaving a few days early. "Did the neighbor scare you that much?" 𝙤𝙤 thought. She was tired of guessing and tormenting herself, so she decided to confront her husband directly. Igor had locked himself in his study. She took a tray with tea and cookies and, under the pretense of caring, knocked on his door. "What do you want?" he snapped. 𝙤𝙤 put on the sweetest smile she could muster. "Nothing. I just brought you tea," she said casually. Igor sighed heavily and leaned back in his chair. "Fine. Put it on the table," he said. "Then, leave. I need to work." She nodded. Her words seemed to relax him, and he let his guard down. Peeking over his shoulder, 𝙤𝙤 noticed an open banking app on his laptop and a credit card nearby. It wasn't hard to put 2 and 2 together. She realized he was about to withdraw or send money to someone. He was so tense that confronting him directly seemed pointless. She left the room, lost in her own thoughts. 𝙤𝙤 felt something bad was happening but couldn't piece it together. She decided to talk to Nadezhda Petrovna, who was sitting on the terrace, basking in the sun. "Don't you think Igor and Natalia might know each other?" she asked, sitting beside her. Her mother-in-law shrugged. "I don't think so," she replied. "The neighbor said they used to live up north. I think you're mixing something. Up." No way, 𝙤𝙤 thought. The conversation with her mother-in-law led nowhere. She pursed her lips and gazed at the neighbor's house. She knew she hadn't imagined it. There was definitely a story behind that house. "Jenka, pack your things," Igor said, coming out of his study. "We're leaving tomorrow." She nodded. Her long-awaited getaway had turned into a tangled mess, so she, too, was eager to get back to her apartment. Nadezhda Petrovna offered to pick some apples for the road, so 𝘾𝙘𝙘 grabbed a basket and headed to the garden. The fruits were so big and beautiful that she caught herself thinking again about wanting to live in the countryside. Lost in her thoughts, she suddenly heard singing. She set the basket down and listened. The voice was beautiful, and for a moment, she closed her eyes, savoring the song. It was clearly a child's voice. Her professional instinct kicked in. Someone with such a strong voice could have a bright future with proper training. 𝘾𝙘𝙘 hurried out of the yard to see who was singing. To her surprise, it was the neighbor's boy, Artem. Not only she, but also Natalia heard him and rushed to her son. "Your son has an incredible voice," 𝘾𝙘𝙘 said, approaching the gate. "He absolutely needs to take vocal lessons. I assure you, he could achieve great things." Artem listened to the praise with enthusiasm, but Natalia's face showed undisguised hostility. "Stay out of our lives," she snapped. 𝘾𝙘𝙘 hadn't expected such venom and was momentarily stunned. "I didn't mean anything by it," she quickly said. "I just couldn't help but comment on his talent. I teach music and I could—" But before she could finish, Natalia cut her off harshly. "Get out of here and never come near my child again. Got it?" Natalia was practically shouting, trembling with anger. "Why are you like this?" 𝘾𝙘𝙘 said, confused. She couldn't understand the reason for such hatred, but Natalia didn't bother to explain. She grabbed her son's hand and dragged him into the house. Artem glanced back at 𝘾𝙘𝙘, wanting to say something, but his mother whispered something sharply, and he fell silent. 𝘾𝙘𝙘 took a shaky breath. It was clear Natalia was deeply hurt, but what could her husband have done to provoke such rage? A few minutes later, 𝘾𝙘𝙘 resumed picking apples. When she finished, her mother-in-law asked her to gather some raspberries. 𝘾𝙘𝙘 was glad to keep her hands busy. As she bent down to a bush, the neighbor's boy appeared from under it. "Oh my God!" 𝘾𝙘𝙘 exclaimed, dropping the basket. A few apples rolled in different directions. "You scared me." "Sorry," Artem said, a bit embarrassed. It turned out there was a small hole in the fence that a child could easily slip through, which is how he ended up in their yard. "You're a music teacher, right?" the boy asked. "Can you give me a few lessons?" 𝘾𝙘𝙘 beamed. A musical talent had practically fallen into her lap. She was about to agree when she remembered Natalia. "I'd love to work with you, but we need your mom's permission," she said. Artem pursed his lips. It was clear his mother wouldn't like the idea. He hesitated for a moment until 𝘾𝙘𝙘 suggested they exchange phone numbers so she could give him singing tips. "Awesome!" Artem agreed eagerly, his eyes lighting up. He was about to run back home, but 𝘾𝙘𝙘 stopped him. "Wait, take an apple," she offered, handing him a fruit. He smiled, slipped back through the fence, and ran home. "Jen!" Igor's stern voice startled her, making her drop the basket again. "Yes?" she said, turning to face him. "How long does it take to get ready?" he grumbled. "I'm ready, and you're still messing around in the garden." 𝘾𝙘𝙘 sighed heavily. He was so eager to leave. As they drove off, Nadezhda Petrovna grew noticeably sad. She wished her children could stay longer, but her son didn't want to hear it. "Mom, we have work," Igor said firmly. "I barely managed to carve out time to visit you." His mother shook her head, wiping tears from the corners of her eyes. 𝘾𝙘𝙘 watched her husband closely. He didn't have any packed schedule. He just wanted to get out of there. "Why are you acting so strange?" She couldn't hold back. "As soon as we got here, it's like you've been replaced." "Igor, what's going on?" "I don't know what you're talking about," he shrugged. But even his body language betrayed him. He sat in a closed-off posture, his shoulders twitching nervously. You didn't need to be a psychologist to see something was eating at him. 𝘾𝙘𝙘 gave up trying to get him to talk, and instead told him about the incident with Natalia when she mentioned Artem's talent. "You shouldn't meddle in other people's families," he replied distantly. "I wasn't going to," Ksenia shot back. "I just wanted to help the kid develop his talent." "Don't help when no one asked you to," Igor said sharply, staring out the window. When they got home, Ksenia immediately contacted Artem. They set a schedule for when both were free and made a plan for lessons. Ksenia communicated with her student via text, and they agreed to meet via video call a couple of times a week. It wasn't as effective as in-person lessons, but it was the best they could do. "You're doing great," Ksenia told him, seeing how hard the boy was trying. "Have you told your mom about our lessons?" Artem looked away and bit his lip. His reaction was answer enough. He hadn't. "We agreed you'd tell her," Ksenia concluded. "This can't go on. Your mom needs to know about our lessons." "She's not my mom," Artem suddenly blurted out. "My mom died when I was born." The revelation was so unexpected that Ksenia's jaw dropped. "Then who's Natalia?" she asked, confused. "My aunt," Artem replied. Silence followed. Ksenia recalled her mother-in-law saying the boy was about 7. She started noticing something in his appearance that reminded her of Igor, but he couldn't be his son. Her subconscious made the leap, and she shuddered. No, that's impossible. We've been married for almost 9 years, she told herself. Igor was a decent, faithful husband. He couldn't have betrayed her. Then she remembered the conversation she'd overheard in the garden. The question slipped out. "Artem, who does your aunt want to get even with?" "Your husband," the boy answered instantly. "Why?" Ksenia's eyes widened. "He hurt us a long time ago," Artem said simply, as if talking about the weather or a toy. "All our troubles are because of him. He's a traitor." It was clear Artem was parroting Natalia's words, which she'd instilled in him over years. Ksenia didn't know how to respond, and didn't want to discuss her husband with a child. Despite everything, the boy shouldn't be dragged into adult drama. "Okay, Artem," she forced a smile. "Do the assignment I gave you, and we'll meet next week." Ksenia slammed her laptop shut and leaned back in her chair. She no longer doubted that Igor was preparing money for Natalia. Her threat must have scared him so much that he decided to buy her off. "What did you do?" she wondered for the umpteenth time. She stood up abruptly and rushed to the shelf where their photo album was kept. She remembered there was a childhood picture of Igor somewhere. Ksenia frantically flipped through the pages until she found it. "My God," she whispered, looking at 7-year-old Igor. She was almost certain now that Artem was his son. Natalia was likely blackmailing him with this. Ksenia sank to the floor, hugging her knees to her chest. Her insides burned. She hadn't been able to give her husband a child, yet he already had a son growing up on the side. But it was a long time ago, and now Igor was faithful only to her. She tried to convince herself. She was willing to accept that people make mistakes in their youth. Maybe Igor didn't even know he had a son. Ksenia clutched her head, trying to figure out what to do next. She didn't want to start a fight or argue with her husband. What happened in the past should stay there. But she knew they couldn't avoid a serious conversation. Meanwhile, Nadezhda Petrovna sat on a bench, enjoying the warm weather. Her children had left a few days ago, leaving her alone. She reflected on life and the people who had long left her. Recently, a woman she sometimes walked with had passed away on a neighboring street. Nadezhda Petrovna sighed heavily. Loneliness was tightening its grip around her throat, making it harder to live alone. As rain began to fall, she stood up. Suddenly, a sharp pain pierced her chest, causing her to double over, clutching her heart. Her hands trembled, and her face contorted, preventing her from calling for help. Fortunately, Natalia, returning from the store, appeared on the street. Quickly assessing the situation, she rushed to her neighbor's side. With her medical background, Natalia knew exactly what to do in a heart attack. Time was critical. But she froze, staring at the mother of the man who had ruined her and her nephew's lives. What will he feel when he learns of his mother's death? How will he live after losing someone close? She thought, watching the life slowly drain from the elderly woman. As Nadezhda Petrovna began to wheeze, Natalia snapped out of it, gently laid her on the bench, and did everything necessary to keep her alive until the ambulance arrived. "Are you going to the hospital?" the paramedic asked, but Natalia just shook her head. She had done her part. When the doctors took Nadezhda Petrovna away, Natalia ran into her house, locked herself in the bathroom, turned on the water, and sobbed loudly. Fate had just given her a chance to get back at her enemy, but she let it slip. "God, Nadezhda Petrovna could have died," she said through tears. No matter how much she hated Igor, his elderly mother was innocent. She shouldn't have to suffer. "Forgive me, Lyudochka," Natalia whispered, wiping her tears. "I'll get my revenge on him, but I'll do it differently." Natalia tiptoed to her room so her nephew wouldn't see her tears and pulled out a worn photo album. Her sister, Lyudmila, had been a true beauty with many suitors vying for her hand. But she fell in love with a married man, Igor. At the time, he and Zhenya had been married for 2 years. Zhenya was depressed about not having children, which strained their relationship. Tired of his perpetually sad and crying wife, Igor met Lyudmila and started an affair. For Lyudmila, it was serious. She dreamed Igor would leave his wife to start a family with her. But when Igor had his fill, he discarded Lyudmila and returned to his wife, who was starting to recover. Lyudmila learned she was pregnant and believed the news would change everything, but Igor laughed in her face. "I don't need you or your child," he told her bluntly, before walking away for good. Lyudmila lost all peace. She was emotionally shattered, her love so easily discarded. She lost interest in life and spent her entire pregnancy detached, as if she'd already given up. Natalia tried to cheer her sister up, talking about how wonderful it would be to have a baby, but Igor's betrayal left too deep a wound. The birth was extremely difficult. It seemed Lyudmila wasn't even trying to bring her child into the world. Artem was born only thanks to the doctor's efforts, but his mother's heart stopped before she could even see him. Natalia was convinced her sister died because of Igor. She couldn't cope with the betrayal. Her body was so weakened that childbirth killed her. Natalia immediately took guardianship of her nephew, vowing to love and care for him as her own. When Artem was a year old, she wrote to Igor, hoping to awaken some fatherly feelings. But he rudely replied that he wanted nothing to do with them. This fueled Natalia's hatred, and she swore to make Igor pay. When Zhenya got the call about her mother-in-law, she was at work and immediately jumped up to head to the countryside. A kind nurse convinced her it wasn't necessary, saying the neighbor had acted in time, and Nadezhda Petrovna's life was no longer in danger. "They won't let you in now anyway," the nurse said. "You can come calmly on the weekend." Zhenya sighed heavily and returned to her lesson, but her mind was far from school. "Kids, keep practicing the song," she said. "I'll step out for a couple of minutes." Closing the door, she dialed her husband's number. They urgently needed to discuss his mother's condition. Igor saw her call, but deliberately silenced his phone. He was in his boss's office, about to give her a gift. "You deserve the whole world," he said dramatically. "But let me give you this modest gift." Because he'd withdrawn money to pay off Natalia, the budget for the gift was significantly reduced. Tatiana opened the box and smirked disdainfully. She'd never have noticed such a cheap trinket. "Thank you, dear," she said graciously. "It's sweet that you thought of me." When he left, she tossed the box into a drawer. Lately, Igor was starting to irritate her more. Her favorite toy was no longer as fun. Tatiana had long seen through his intentions. She knew he didn't have the feelings he professed at every meeting. He was desperately trying to climb the career ladder, but she had no intention of helping him. Tatiana was a smart woman who had achieved great heights at a young age. She'd been through fire and water, so she was wise beyond her years. She promoted only talented employees with potential. Igor wasn't one of them. She kept him around solely for amusement. Ksenia couldn't reach her husband. After 5 attempts, Igor texted her to stop bothering him because he was in an important meeting. Ksenia sent a long message saying his mother's health was more important than work, but he didn't even read it. That evening, she called Artem via video chat as usual. "Hey, how's it going?" she asked. "Did you do the exercise I recommended?" The boy nodded eagerly. He loved the lessons and prepared for each one with enthusiasm. "I can sing?" he offered. Ksenia agreed. His voice was a true delight to her ears. She thought about how his voice might break with age but hoped it wouldn't worsen. Artem didn't know, but his aunt had come home early that day. As he hit the right note, Natalia opened his bedroom door. He stopped abruptly. "Don't stop. Keep going," Ksenia urged. "Who's that?" Natalia exclaimed, reaching the laptop in 2 strides. "It's you. I told you to stay away from my child. What's not clear?" Realizing they'd been caught, Ksenia sighed, shakily. "Natalia, can we talk one-on-one?" She wanted to resolve things diplomatically. But Natalia was so furious with their family that the mere sight of Ksenia ignited intense hatred. She didn't respond, hung up the call, and glared at her nephew. "I told you I don't want you talking to her," she said sternly, crossing her arms. "But I want to. Aunt Ksenia is helping me. I'm learning to sing, and it's really important," Artem said, his voice tinged with hurt. Natalia sighed. She didn't take his passion for singing seriously. "If this happens again, you'll be punished. Now hand over your phone and tablet. Now." Reluctantly, Artem placed his devices in front of her. Natalia grabbed the laptop too, cutting off all his means of communication. "I hate you," he shouted through tears, burying his face in his pillow. Natalia flinched but showed no emotion. She straightened her back and clenched her lips tightly. "It's all for your sake," she said before leaving the room. After the interrupted call, Ksenia tried contacting Artem again, but he didn't respond. She guessed his aunt had taken his phone. "Looks like I'll have to go," she thought, starting to pack. She needed to speak to Natalia in person. She didn't feel any negativity toward her, understanding that the woman was just trying to protect her nephew. Leaving a message for her husband, Ksenia set off and arrived at her mother-in-law's house that evening, planning to visit her soon. When Artem and his aunt stepped outside, Ksenia approached them. "Good evening. Please, let's talk." Natalia gave her a scornful look, then glanced at Artem, who smiled joyfully at seeing his teacher. "Artem, go inside," Natalia said, then pointed Ksenia to a nearby bench. "First, I want to thank you. You saved my mother-in-law," Ksenia said sincerely. "It's scary to think what could have happened if you weren't there." "It wasn't very wise to leave her alone," Natalia replied dryly. "But your husband is used to abandoning women." Ksenia furrowed her brow, struggling to understand. "Are you talking about Artem's mom?" she guessed. "Don't tell me. You know nothing," Natalia said sharply. "I'll never believe your husband didn't brag," but Ksenia shook her head. She truly didn't fully understand. All she had were her own suspicions. "I always thought Igor was faithful," she admitted bitterly. Natalia laughed, but seeing the genuine confusion and sadness in Ksenia's eyes, she fell silent. It suddenly hit her that Ksenia was as much a victim of deception as her sister had been. Then she told Lyudmila's story. Speaking of her, Natalia couldn't hold back tears, still not over the pain. God, that's so sad, Ksenia said, touching Natalia's hand. What a fool I was. All these years I thought I was living with the perfect man, but he turned out to be a complete hypocrite. Natalia shook her head. He needs to be punished, she said with hatred. He will be, Ksenia said confidently. Hypocrites always get what they deserve. They didn't notice how night fell during their conversation. Natalia no longer felt hatred toward Ksenia. Will you let me work with Artem again? Natalia nodded, wiping away a tear. Her sister had also dreamed of singing, but their parents didn't support her, so she had to give up and study economics. Maybe Artem will really make it, Natalia said with a smile. I have no doubt, Ksenia assured her. But they didn't realize a third person was listening to their entire conversation. He wasn't hiding under a tree or behind a fence, but was dozens of kilometers away, yet heard every word. They've teamed up, Igor growled, slamming his fist on the chair. Months ago, Igor, obsessed with control, had planted a bug in his wife's bag to ensure she didn't suspect his affair with his boss. He often checked where she went and who she talked to. Until now, he'd found nothing suspicious. But this conversation shocked him. I'm sorry for butting in, Natalia began. But this man doesn't deserve you. You're genuine, and he's just ordinary. I don't believe you're happy. Ksenia couldn't hold back a smirk, recalling the fortune teller's words from years ago. With this man, you'll never have a child. You're right, she said quietly. I don't want to live with someone who abandoned his child. On her way home, Ksenia reevaluated their marriage. Igor never truly listened to her, living only for his own desires and ambitions. Her dreams didn't interest him. How many times had she brought up children, only for the conversation to go nowhere? Igor wasn't willing to see doctors to find out why she couldn't conceive, nor consider IVF or adoption. What has he ever done for our marriage? She muttered, staring at their wedding photo in Nadezhda Petrovna's frame. Even there, Ksenia smiled brightly, while Igor looked like he was doing her a favor. He overheard everything and gripped, his pencil so hard it snapped in two. That bitch, he exploded. First, she tried to blackmail me, and now she's turning my wife against me. Igor paced the room. When his gaze fell on the stack of money he'd withdrawn for Natalia, he smirked. You won't get a thing from me, he thought, his face breaking into a smile. Now Igor planned to strike first. Lyosha, will you help me teach a lesson to a certain fool? He asked, calling one of his wildest friends. One day, Natalia was heading to the city to visit a client. She worked as a home masseuse and chose the train to get there faster. As she passed through security, an alarm went off. Show me your bag, a guard said with an unpleasant smile. Unaware, Natalia opened her bag. To her shock, the guard pulled out several packets of precious stones. Gotcha, thief, he said smugly. These aren't mine, Natalia exclaimed, wide-eyed. I swear, where would I even get such stones? It turned out a jewelry store near the station had been robbed. Exactly, not yours. You'll explain it all to the police, the guard said sternly, calling a patrol to take the frightened Natalia away. At the station, no one listened to her. Since the stones were found in her bag, her guilt seemed undeniable. Who are you? Trying to convince? The police chief said dismissively. Get a lawyer if you want, but my advice? Cooperate, and maybe you'll get a lighter sentence. What sentence? Natalia cried. My child is waiting for me at home. I have to get back to him. You should have thought of that earlier, the officer smirked. Now you can say goodbye to your parental rights. Natalia gasped in horror. She asked to call Ksenia, the only person she could trust. Ksenia rushed to the station, trying to convince them Natalia was honest and would never do such a thing, but they wouldn't listen. Please take care of Artem, Natalia begged. He's all I have. Ginea nodded quickly. They barely had time to exchange a word. "Listen, I'm sure this is a terrible mistake," Ginea said. "She was set up." "Prove it." The officer smirked openly. "Isn't that your job?" she asked, surprised. "You know what?" he snapped, getting angry. "Your visit's over. Get out, or do you want to join your friend?" Ginea sighed and left slowly. She didn't want to leave Natalia there, but she had no choice. Outside, a young guard caught up with her. "I don't believe your friend is guilty," he said, breathlessly. "I've seen many criminals in my years at the police, but she's not one of them." "Thanks," Ginea replied. "But how do we prove it?" "Don't worry," Roman said. "I have an idea." They exchanged numbers, and he promised to keep her updated. This gave Ginea a small spark of hope. She went home, needing to pick up her mother-in-law from the hospital and figure out how to explain to Artem that his aunt would be gone for a while. Igor wasn't bothered by his wife's absence. He was too caught up in his own problems. He realized his boss had no intention of promoting him, so there was no point in wasting time and money on her. He started distancing himself from Tatiana, eyeing a girl from another department named Sofia. She came from a wealthy family and worked at the office for fun. Igor decided to give her a bouquet with a hidden note containing a poem praising her intelligence and beauty. "Sonia, be careful," one woman warned her. "Just recently, Rishatov was chasing Tatiana Ivanovna, and now he's switched to you." "Oh no, I don't need that kind of happiness," Sofia laughed. "I'm not running after a guy who's chasing the boss." Tatiana overheard as she passed by. She didn't care about her lover's escapades, but she fiercely protected her reputation and was ready to crush Igor. She had repeatedly told him to keep their affair discreet, but his carelessness had made it office gossip. "Yulia, come here," she said coldly, crossing her arms. The gossiping women froze and stood at attention. "Prepare a transfer request for Rishatov to another position," Tatiana said, baring her teeth. "He'll be a legal assistant now." Everyone who heard gasped. Igor was demoted several ranks, a job usually given to student interns. When he found out, he was furious. "Is this some kind of revenge?" he fumed, barely holding back a sigh. "Shout. No, I just assessed your abilities realistically," his boss replied with a smile. Igor wanted to say more, but she kicked him out of her office. He left, slamming the door. Meanwhile, Ginea was caring for Artem, who was now on his own. Every day, he asked when his aunt would return. "Soon, sweetie," Ginea said each time, lying that Natalia was resting at a sanatorium to recover. But a few days later, Roman called. After reviewing hundreds of surveillance tapes, he found one showing the moment someone planted the stolen jewels in Natalia's bag. He'd already passed the evidence to his superiors, so her release was imminent. Ginea rejoiced. Justice had prevailed. When Roman showed her the footage, she gasped. "That's Lyosha," she said hoarsely, "my husband's friend." Now, she had no doubt Natalia ended up in jail because of Igor. What a creep, she thought, realizing she couldn't delay any longer. She needed to file for divorce as soon as possible. "I don't want to carry the name of such a horrible person," she said passionately when asked about the reason for the divorce. She hesitated to tell her mother-in-law, given her weak heart, but hiding such big news was impossible. "Zhenya, how could this happen?" Nadezhda Petrovna asked, nearly crying. 9 years and you're throwing it all away? I don't recognize you." "Nadezhda Petrovna, I'm not the one who threw it away. Thank your son. He's ruined not just my life but others too." Soon she had to face Igor in court for the divorce. "You'll regret this," he whispered. "Who needs a 30-year-old? Divorcee with no apartment or decent job? If you had looks, maybe. But you've got nothing good left." Ginea just smirked. "This man was declaring his love to me just months ago," she said with irony. Leaving the courtroom, She took a deep breath. During the process, it came out that Igor had been cheating with his boss. But by then, 𝙤𝙤 felt nothing. She had suffered enough and now just wanted to walk away and erase him from her life. "Divorce suits you," Roman said one day while they were walking together. 𝙤𝙤 couldn't hold back a cheerful laugh. It was a strange compliment, but she had indeed blossomed. Her shoulders straightened, her smile returned, and a playful spark reappeared in her eyes. She hadn't noticed how close she'd grown to Roman. He helped her save Natalia, move out from Igor's place, and even picked her up from work. When the excuses for meeting ran out, they started just walking and enjoying each other's company. He, too, carried the pain of a divorce, tied to lies and betrayal. Two wounded souls found each other. "Yes, but I love happiness much more," 𝙤𝙤 laughed, looking at the lake they'd reached. "You'll have happiness," Roman said seriously. 𝙤𝙤 smiled, looking down at her feet. She felt like she was falling in love again, but was scared to jinx the fragile feeling. "Can you stay with Artem?" Natalia asked. "I'm not feeling well." Lately, Natalia's condition had worried 𝙤𝙤. She often complained of weakness and headaches. At first, everyone thought she just needed rest after her ordeal in jail. But as time passed and she didn't improve, 𝙤𝙤 insisted she see a doctor. "You have cancer," the doctor said, after Natalia's tests. 𝙤𝙤 was in shock, nearly falling off her chair. But Natalia took it calmly, almost resignedly. "Thank you," she said, leaving the office. 𝙤𝙤 rushed after her, ready to scour every hospital for a doctor who could find the right treatment. "There's no point." Natalia shook her head. "You heard him. It's the final stage." 𝙤𝙤 passionately argued there was always a chance, that she just had to keep fighting. But Natalia looked at her with such sadness and exhaustion that 𝙤𝙤 fell silent. "𝙤𝙤, this is my choice," Natalia said quietly. "I want to spend my last days in peace with my loved ones." 𝙤𝙤 opened her mouth to object, but Natalia gently touched her hand, asking her not to interrupt. "I have one request," Natalia whispered. "Take care of Artem." Tears streamed down 𝙤𝙤's cheeks as she nodded, squeezing her friend's hand. Over those weeks, Natalia had become like a sister, and losing her was excruciating. But fate had its own plans and spared no one's feelings. 2 months after the diagnosis, Natalia passed away in her sleep after a beautiful day by the lake with 𝙤𝙤, Roman, and Artem. 𝙤𝙤 tried to hold it together but struggled. At the funeral, she held Artem's hand the whole time. He didn't cry, just stared at the coffin with his big eyes. "Why does everyone die?" he asked, referring not just to his aunt, but also his mother. 𝙤𝙤 opened her mouth, but a wave of hysteria hit her. She didn't know what to say to a child who'd lost so many loved ones. Roman stepped in. "Listen, buddy, it's not as scary as it seems," he said, crouching in front of him. "Life is like that, and you have to be ready for challenges. But the main thing is not to give up. 𝙤𝙤 and I will always be here." 𝙤𝙤 looked at Roman gratefully. His strength helped them get through that awful day. Alone later, she buried her face in his shoulder and sobbed. "Shh, darling. Shh," he whispered. "I promise everything will be okay." Roman never left her and Artem, doing everything to keep grief from consuming them. Slowly they began to heal, helped by their shared passion, singing. Through the songs he performed, Artem expressed the pain in his young heart. When 𝙤𝙤 listened, goosebumps covered her skin. She was certain of his talent. They practiced every day, and then 𝙤𝙤 entered him in a music competition. He won, which motivated him to keep singing, with 𝙤𝙤's active support. Gradually, relief came. When it did, Roman proposed. "Of course, yes," 𝙤𝙤 answered instantly. They adopted Artem and became a family. One day, on her way home from work, Ġenia ran into the fortune teller. Without a word, the woman approached and looked into her eyes. "Now everything will be different," she said with a wide smile. "With the right man, you'll fulfill your dream." She vanished as suddenly as she appeared. Ġenia stood there, blinking, not even thinking of her ex-husband, whose life was rapidly falling apart. He was in an open war with his former lover, Tatiana, who was retaliating for his betrayal. To strike back, Igor defected to a competitor, but he was quickly exposed and lost his job. His ex-boss ensured no reputable company would hire him, leaving him with only low-paying jobs. After the 𝙗𝙘𝙝𝙚 fortune teller's words, Ġenia couldn't recover for a long time. She didn't want to build false hopes only to be hurt again, but one day, she felt so ill she had to go to the hospital. "Don't worry, you're fine," the doctor smiled. "You're pregnant." Hearing those words, Ġenia nearly cried. She turned to Roman, whose eyes mirrored her emotions, and they hugged tightly. Now they would be much happier. If you enjoyed the story, please support me with a thumbs up. It's a simple gesture, but it means a lot to me. All the best.